Happy Halloween ish. It is October 18th, 2024. And this is the Dylan Knows Network. Dylan Knows, I'm Dylan Lang. For those who don't know, Dylan Knows is my show I do every Saturday night. I've been doing it now for 11 years. I've added a few other shows. I've added interviews with myself, which I talk about other stuff as well. And I just started the list show. So I decided I'm going to increase the size of the list show just for this upcoming 13 days because Halloween is one of my favorite holidays. And I have come up with at least 13 different ideas for shows. I'm going to try to do a show a day from now to Halloween. I have some changes here and there, and I can do whatever I want to because it's my show, my channel. But they're all going to be sort of list stuff that's going to be all sort of combined with like horror, Halloween, and stuff like that. You might get a guest appearance from my daughter who is thinking about doing her own version of the show, her own kind of show also. So, hold on a second. Stop. No. Stop. Sorry, it's my black cat, Pepper, is eating the Christmas wreath over there. Anywho, I should put it up there. Actually, that might be better. That's a better idea, actually. Okay, about that later. About that next time. Anyway, so this is 13 days. 13 days of Halloween. First episode. I'm going to do the top 80 Halloween films. Part 1 and part 2. Damn it! Stop. Down. Get down. No. Right. Sorry. The top 80 Halloween films. First part 41 through 80 through 41. So I'll be going from 80 down to 41, and then tomorrow I hope to do 40 to number 1. When I say Halloween movies, first of all, I'm not a big horror guy, so I don't like a lot of gore, and there's not a lot of classic horror films that I like to watch. But there are scary movies that are interesting to watch that I watch during the year, stuff like that, or I've seen before. And Halloween, right around Halloween, the month of October, even September somewhat, are the best 2 months of the year to start, just binging on horror films. So I've got scary horror films, I've got funny horror films, I got family horror films, all types of films that you could sit down and watch during the month of October with your family or with loved ones or whatever, friends, whatever, and just talk about it. These are the ones I like. The lists are fluid, so this could be something completely different next year if I decide to do it next year. The numbers might be different. I might have seen other films that I like, or I might take some off, so on and so forth. So just to bear in mind, these are just my everything I say here is my choices. You don't have to agree with them. The placements where I put them. As I said, it's fluid. A movie that's number 76 could be number 46, next year, next month, whatever. So we'll see. So right now, as always with my list show, I always do an honorable mention. So I'm going to do honorable mentions for 80 through 41, and then an honorable mention for 40 through 1 as well. My honorable mention for this one is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer with Christy Swanson, Luke Perry, Donald Sutherland, and what's his face? Arquette. David Arquette is in there as well. Rutger Hauer, Paul Rubens. So we've got all kinds of. It's a good movie. It is campy. Joss Whedon did write it. This was his first Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie. He was trying for more of what we get from the TV series, but instead the film company's like, nah, we got to make it a little bit more funny. So they added some stuff to it and changed things up, and it wasn't quite what Joss had in mind. But in all, it's still a entertaining film to watch during the holiday season of Halloween. Number 80 is Mel Brooks's kind of like his last film that he did because he didn't really direct any of History of the World Part 2. He wrote some of it, but he didn't really direct any of it. But Dracula Dead and Loving It, which is his parody of Bram Stoker's Dracula from Francis Ford Coppola. This time he has Leslie Nielsen as the vampire, and it makes fun of not just the vampire tropes that were in Bram Stoker's Dracula, but in other vampire movies as well. Again, small sort of cast like that. Peter McNichol, who steals every movie he's in, steals again here as Renfield. So you've got all kinds of fun stuff with that. But this is, and Mel Brooks is actually himself as Van Helsing. So that's kind of, I think it's not Van Helsing. He's made him Jewish, but it's funny. But yeah, Dracula Dead and Loving It is a fun final sort of film for Mel Brooks. And I mean, not as good as some of his other movies that he's done, but it's still a decent watch. And Leslie Nielsen, who absolutely loves chews the scenery like crazy here. Number 79 is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Kenneth Branagh, Helena Bonham Carter, and Robert De Niro decided to do their version of Frankenstein. And this was really kind of the last sort of Frankenstein movie we had until recently, where we've got a bunch of them coming out within the next year or so. So it's kind of good, but this was more trying to stick with the book itself. It's kind of a muddled mess, but for a Halloween film to watch, during scary season, whatever, it's not bad. And Kenneth Branagh is a pretty damn good director, and I got to put him on my list of director actors that I've got working on also. Let me write that down here real quick. I'm working on another list of actor directors, and Kenneth Branagh's up there as well. This was the movie, I think, where he got into a little bit of trouble because I think he and Helena Bonham Carter had an affair while he was still married to Emma Thompson during the making of this film. But it strives to be a good adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and for all intents and purposes, it does a pretty decent job. I think it was produced by Coppola because after Bram Stoker's Dracula, it sort of renewed interest in these sort of Universal monster things. So he produced a bunch of these films, and this is one of them. So Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is pretty good. Number 78 is a more recent film that came out around 2020 with Kristen Stewart. No, not that one. Underwater, which a lot of people don't know about. And the main reason this one is on the list where it is because Underwater is a scary underwater film. Underwater horror is one we haven't really delved into too much when it comes to horror movies. And this was a pretty decent one when it came to straight up horror. But the main reason why this is on the list is because it's not distinctly put out there to say this is Cthulhu, but everything was pointing at the creature being a Cthulhu-esque creature being whatever, and could be considered maybe the first kind of real Cthulhu-esque movie that we've seen before. So, and as always, Kristen Stewart as an underrated actress, she does better than you think she does, and it's again decent underwater horror film. Just entertaining for spooky season. Again, most movies are, they might not be fantastic, but they're really good to watch during a spooky season, like during marathons or with friends or loved ones, stuff like that. Not necessarily family, because, be sure you get the ratings right, because Underwater is rated R. I think Mary Shelley's Frankenstein might be a PG-13, and Dracula Dead Love's like a PG-13, so. Number 77 is the Blair Witch Project, the original one from 1999. 1999 was a great year for film. The Blair Witch Project was filmed here in Maryland. And the film itself is okay, but it's the buildup that was really the selling point that made the film be one of the most successful independent films ever. Sci-Fi Channel aired a fantastic documentary about the mythology of the Blair Witch that tied into the movie as well. That and the fact that people were believing that the three actors who were in the the Blair Witch Project were actually real people who actually did vanish in the woods of Maryland, and all that was left was their film canisters. People believed that for the longest time that they were not actors, that this was actually a documentary almost of an actual event. And it's kind of funny and interesting when you think about that. And again, the sci-fi documentary really didn't help any because it was that good. And that's the main reason why I bought the Blair Witch DVD, is because it has that awesome documentary that was on the Sci-Fi Channel on there, and it is so good. I think it's better than the movie, to be honest. Sets up the mythology, gets you really thinking about stuff, and then when you go into the movie, you can get past all the monotony and the not bringing the scary till a bit later in the film, and not really delving onto it that much, but making it kind of interesting. So it's entertaining, but it's one of those things that, I don't know if I need to see it again, but what did it the best was the build up for it, the absolute belief that these people were actually real people. In fact, when I saw in the movie theater, I knew it wasn't real. But there were friends of my mom's who I saw that I knew in the movie theater when I was leaving. I saw them like, "Hey, did you enjoy the movie? It's great, wasn't it?" And they were looking at me like I grew a second head, because they were like, "What are you talking about? It's like a snuff film." It's like, no, it's I don't know. It's not real. Those were actors. So, and, but yeah, it's definitely, it really is one of the films that, what's the proper word I'm thinking of, really gets you thinking about what was going on in 1999. It was like that sort of thing. 1999 had such great, interesting films. I did a show on them already, about them. I talked about this already, but Blair Witch was just kind of, it felt right for 1999, beginning of the new century, so on and so forth. And it was just kind of a nice little film. But yeah, it's number 77. Number 76, Blumhouse is, and I talk about Blumhouse all the time. Blumhouse is one of the best production houses out there. They know exactly what they're doing, what they're talking, and how they can be successful. They do a bunch of low budget horror films, $1 to $5 million sort of range. Get a lot of like some unknown actors, or maybe some actors who've done some other stuff as well, and don't do it. And put them in the film, and it might only make like 12 or 20 million for its entire run. But when you made the film between 1 and 5 million, that is all profit. And horror films are the easiest film to get audiences to go to. And I don't understand why more horror films are not released during the September-October window, particularly the October window. Obviously, there's some exceptions. Smile 2 is coming out this week. But it leads me to believe that something isn't clicking, because this is the time where it's scary season, where you want to watch scary movies. So you'll go to the movies with your buddies or loved ones and go see a scary movie because it's the season. Their remake of The Invisible Man is number 76. Again, low budget, kind of a creepy story. And it was successful. It was critically acclaimed, did pretty good. And it gives them a chance then to, with these smaller budget films and the profits they're making from that, then they can maybe throw something to like a Five Nights at Freddy's, or something where they can build up, or a Halloween, trilogy, whatever, where they can build up, get some big actors and some big stuff using some of the profits they get from these smaller horror movies. So that's why I love Blumhouse. In fact, Blumhouse, I had the coolest thing. I'll just, because it literally just happened. New York Comic Con's going on this week. I'll talk about this tomorrow on my actual show. But they just posted Blumhouse's recap. They've got Megan 2.0, Drop, Woman in the Yard, Insidious, Conjuring 4, Black Phone 2, Exorcist, Mortal Kombat 2, Soulmate, FNAF 2, and Wolfman are all coming out in the next year or so, year and a half or so. And half of those, maybe more than half of those are low budgeted films, and they're going to make a profit. They're doing their version of they're doing their version of they're the ones who are stoking the October and horror stuff, so it's good for them. There you are, Pepsi. There you are. What are you doing? So that's number 76. 75 is The Black Phone, another Blumhouse film, as I just talked about. The sequel's coming out here soon. Ethan Hawke portraying a serial killer who kidnaps a child, and in the basement where he's being held, there is a mysterious black phone that rings, and when he picks it up, he hears the voices of the serial killer's previous victims. Ethan Hawke absolutely does a phenomenal job as the horrible, awful serial killer. Scott Derrickson, who directed Doctor Strange, directed it, and it's based on, I believe it's a Joe Hill story, who is the son of Stephen King. So Black Phone, and it was so successful, a sequel, as I just said, a sequel is forthcoming here within the next year. Number 74 is, when I'm doing my Halloween list and stuff like that, there's going to be too much of certain things, because Halloween is a big event sort of thing. Like when I do later on in the next couple 13 days, I'm going to do one about TV shows, best Halloween TV shows. And something like a Simpsons, where there's 26 Treehouse of Horrors, I'm not going to do a list of just them. So I'm going to group them into one list, and that's what I'm doing with this. The Resident Evil movie series, based on the horror video game, is number 74. There's been about 3 or 4 of them. They are pretty decent video game adaptations, not the best in the world, but again, an easy, fun, recognizable series. And does just enough that the gamers are enjoying it, and you get that little horror aspect as well. Number 73, we find Robert Rodriguez teaming up with Kevin Williamson, who was one of the hottest commodities in the late 90s, and this came out in the late 90s. Back when teenage actor horror movies became huge for Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban Legend, so on and so forth. So everybody was trying to find the next one. And so Robert Rodriguez got together with Kevin Williamson, who started this whole thing off with his script, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and Scream. And he wrote the script for The Faculty, which is Robert Rodriguez's version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but in a Texas high school. You get a group of like Breakfast Club-esque characters, all different people. You get like the nerd, you've got the prom queen, you've got the drug addict, you've got the criminal, you got the athlete, you got the social misfit, all that stuff, who have to team up to take down the aliens who have infiltrated their school and their teachers and are trying to take over the world. It's a decent remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and it does have a good young cast. Josh Hartnett, Elijah Wood are the 2 standouts in that one as well. And then the actors, you have Salma Hayek, you've got Rebecca Romijn, I think, is in that as well. Not Rebecca Romijn, the actress who played Jean Grey Phoenix. I forget her name right now. Let's see if I can dig that up for you real quick. 1998. Okay. Josh Hartnett, Elijah Wood, Clea Duvall, Jordana Brewster, Laura Harris, Usher, Sean Hattasey, Salma Hayek, Famke Johnson, that's what I was looking for, Jon Stewart, Robert Patrick, Bebe Neuwirth, Piper Laurie, Danny Masterson, Christopher McDonald, Daniel Von Bargen, Summer Phoenix. Those are the big names right there. The rest are just a bunch of local actors, stuff like that. But that's your cast, and it's a decent thing. It's Robert Rodriguez is my fellow June 20th baby, so I gotta support that. And Kevin Williamson did write the script, so you gotta love that. So The Faculty is number 73. Number 72 is an animated film. Not all my Halloween stuff are going to have animated aspects to it, but the top horror films will, because, Halloween is sometimes you want to watch movies with the family or you want to watch them. Monster House is a little bit different. It's a animated film, but it's not like a upbeat, cheerful one. It's sort of in the same vein as sort of a Coraline and stuff like that. About a house that is sentient, and the person who lives inside of it, and the kids who try to figure out a way to get inside. Number 71 is the adaptation, Guillermo del Toro's adaptation of the comic book by Mike Mignola, Hellboy. Ron Perlman as Hellboy was phenomenal casting. Unfortunately, the script itself, it was not that great because Hellboy in the comics does not fall in love with the Firestarter woman, and there is not a love triangle between him and a unknown character. Now, you need to have the unknown character who's not in the comics to be the everyman, the new man, to come in and take a look at this weird new BPRD sort of group and an idea of what's going on. You need to have that. It's a cliche, but you kind of need to have that just to get it started. But Hellboy does enough that it does adapt a little bit of Mike Mignola's storyline, but they had to change up a little bit because Mike Mignola's storyline was just a straight up horror action comic book story, and they needed to change it up a little bit. So they did. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but it's still an entertaining Halloween spooky season comic book movie. There's not very many comic book movies out there that you can say that you can watch that during spooky season, but Hellboy is one of those. The Hellboy sequel is just as good by Guillermo del Toro, and it's a little bit more online of what you expect from Hellboy, but for whatever reason, it just does not click with me. So the original stays in at number 71, mainly due to the fact that they do adapt from the comics into the movies, the scene where Hellboy walks with a dead body on his back who talks to him. So that was some of the comics, and it's fun to see that. With Guillermo del Toro involved, it does make it kind of a horror-esque sort of thing. So that's number 71. Number 70 is another 1999 film. The Mummy with Brendan Fraser is one of the most, is not really a horror film, though it is kind of adapting the old Universal monster of the Mummy in a new format. This is more of an Indiana Jones sort of adventure action film. It does have our horror aspects, don't get me wrong, the scare beetles, the wrapping of the mummification of somebody, the evil spirits coming out to suck Imhotep in, the curses that are put upon the Egyptians due to Imhotep not getting what he wants, the giant sand face that destroys airplanes. So it has horror aspects to it, and before you get the full-on built, handsome-looking Arnold Vosloo, who plays Imhotep, you have the kind of scraggly, bony sort of mummy that you expect from a mummy movie. And again, more of an action, adventure, romance, but it's got enough connection to the Universal monsters that you could conceivably put this in during a spooky season, because there is spooky stuff that happens, though it is, as I said, more technically an action adventure romance instead of a horror film. Number 69 is Horns. I think another Joe Hill story. Producing a movie. Daniel Radcliffe did it after his Harry Potter stuff. It's an unusual film about a boy who suddenly starts sprouting horns like a demon. So it's the exploration of that. Again, fairly entertaining, but perfect for like a spooky season sort of thing when you want to marathon stuff. Number 68 is Mel Brooks' second appearance on the list. Young Frankenstein, which is his homage to the 1930s Universal monster Frankenstein movie. The great story about that was he was able to use some of the original sets and equipment that was used in the original movie because they were in storage, and he talked to the guy who was the set designer, who was still alive at the time. He said, go ahead and use them. So he did. Gene Wilder, Peter Boyle, Gene Hackman, Terry Garr, Madeline Kahn, and I forget who plays Igor. But a entertaining homage, spoof parody of the 1930s monster films. I find it a little odd, though, that a lot of people say it is funnier than Blazing Saddles, and that is just not true. But that's for another story. But for now, Young Frankenstein is a good, again, as I said, not all these are going to be scary movies. They're going to have scary connections, but some of them are just going to be fun, sort of palate cleansing family. If you want to do a family sort of night as well. Now, be warned, there is some adult humor in Young Frankenstein, but still it is an enjoyable enough film. Speaking of kids, this is unbelievable that it was kind of geared at kids, but it's also kind of freaky. Number 67 at Five Nights at Freddy. Again, the sequel's coming out from Blumhouse. That's a Blumhouse film. Matthew Lillard and the guy from Hutchinson, who was in the Hunger Games, are the stars of this one. And based on the video game and the toys and stuff like that, about animatronic creatures that come to life at night and take over the joint that they're staying at. It's a decent, scary film, and aimed at kids. It might be a little heavy for kids, but it's aimed at them, and they're kind of used to it because it's based on the video game they know and love. So definitely worth a watch. Definitely worth a family watching thing like that. Or if you kind of just like video games, and you know the movie, there you go. Number 66 finds Tim Burton's what is that? Stop motion animated film Frankenweenie, which is really kind of a remake of his live action short film he made for Disney that starred Daniel Stern. It's basically taking the Frankenstein myth and switching it to a dog. There was also a movie called Frankenhooker where a sort of similar thing happens, but with a hooker. But that was exploitation film. This is Frankenweenie, about a young boy whose best friend is his dog. His only friend really is his dog. And one day his dog gets hit by a car and dies, and the kid can't handle it. And he's a genius, so he comes up with a way to bring him back to life, i.e. via the Frankenstein-esque sort of thing. And his dog comes back to life, Sparky, and things go haywire from there. It's a weird little movie. I had just seen it. I had just watched it recently for the first time. A good voice cast: Martin Short, Winona Ryder, Catherine O'Hara are just some of the voices in this one. And the film itself is bizarre. It's gorgeous to look at, but I think the live action version was probably a little bit better than the animated version. So the animated version, you can expand the story a little bit and do a little bit more in depth with it and do more things about it. So the original short was just about the kid bringing his dog back to life. The live action short. The animated version has that as like the starting point, but after that, all the kids in the town learn about this, and they all want him to bring back their dead animals, but it doesn't quite work the same way as how his dog came back to life, and so they have to figure out a way to stop them. So again, a really kind of bizarre film, but it's definitely a Tim Burton-esque film. That was number 66. Number 65 is another one based on a comic book. This one's 30 Days of Night, which is one of the greatest single ideas ever in a comic book. Steve Niles is the creator of that. And no one has ever thought about this before in comic book format, is having vampires go to the furthest north point that they can get to. It's Barrow is what the old name is. It's been reverted back to its Indian name now, but Barrow, Alaska, which is the furthest northern city you can get to in Alaska. that during the winter gets, I think, actually more than 30 days of night where the sun doesn't rise for 30 days. It's polar night. Svalbard, which is an island near the North Pole, they don't get sun from November to like February or March. So they have complete darkness for like 4 or 5 months. This was a 30-day window. But it's a great idea. It's up there with the idea that was also in a comic book, werewolves being on the moon, because the moon is what triggers werewolves to change, but they've never made a movie of that. But 30 Days of Night is a good comic book story about vampires that descend upon the small town of, we'll call it Barrow for now, because I don't know the official Eskimo Indian name of it, and just dominate and take over the city during the 30 Days of Night, because the sun never comes up, so they can be there 24/7. And these aren't your typical, suave, sort of Count Dracula vampires. These are the vicious, big mouth, monstrous looking ones, and they decimate the town. And luckily, some of the townsfolk are able to team up and are able to get them out of there. But it is definitely a good idea. It had 3 comic book spinoffs, and it had a sequel movie made, called Dark Days, I think, but didn't register on my list. 30 Days of Night is a very hard R sort of movie based on the comic book. It is a great story idea and a decent movie to watch. Particularly, actually, it's great to watch during spooky season, but it's also pretty decent to watch during the dead of winter, because luckily you're not in Barrow where they don't get any sun, where you might get some sun where you are. Number 64 is Ghost Ship. After the success of 13 Ghosts, it's either Dimension or DreamWorks or something like that decided to, and it was produced, I think, by I want to say Sam Raimi's sort of production company, because he also did 13 Ghosts. And so Ghost Ship was the second movie, I think it was Image Movers or something like that, or Dark Tower or something like that Productions, which was a like an early Blumhouse almost, but they tried instead to go with a little bit higher echelon of actors to do stuff. But Ghost Ship was the second one about that, and again is a movie we don't really a movie trope we don't see often enough. Actual ghost ships and what happens on them. Juliana Margulies and Ron Eldrod are the main actors in this one, and again, it's a decent. If you like 13 Ghosts, it's sort of a similar sort of vein like that. But the fact that it's on this list at number 64 is due to the fact that it's a horror trope you don't really see all that often, and it's fun to, when you're trying to do your Halloween marathon, horror movie marathon, whatever, to try to get as many different story ideas as you can in there. Number 63 is another video game adaptation, but it is probably the darkest of all of them, Silent Hill. I think there's going to remake or a sequel or something to it. But Silent Hill is such a great, again, another great idea for a video game, an abandoned town. Well, not really abandoned, but a town that just seems to have all kinds of weird, bizarre, supernatural things and creatures and stuff like that roaming around there. And it's just in sort of the middle of nowhere in this sort of fog thing. It's sort of like the back rooms. You get in there and you really can't escape, sort of thing. So it's a very entertaining, very dark, very spooky Halloween movie. Again, more for an adult aspect, but if you played the video game, you get kind of what you want out of it. It hits all the classic video game tropes that were in the game to make their way to the movie. So Silent Hill is number 63. Talking about trying to change up things, Sam Raimi makes his first appearance on the list with The Gift, is number 62. Cate Blanchett, Greg Kinnear, Keanu Reeves, Katie Holmes. It's a gothic horror film set in the South. Cate Blanchett plays like a single mom who is a psychic and sort of a psychic medium, I guess you could say, and can see and talk sort of like to dead people and stuff like that. And Katie Holmes, who is the sexy buxom young female lead in it is, and this isn't spoiler because it happens early in the movie, is killed, and they have to figure out who the killer is. And the obvious contestant is Keanu Reeves, who does an absolutely non-Keanu role where he plays an utter and complete psychopathic bully asshole son of a bitch. He's so good in this. He's so evil. He's so good. And the twist with him in the movie is actually kind of interesting as well, that you're expecting that, not everything is as it seems. And Keanu still plays the role as this, sadistic shitbag, and that doesn't change through the whole movie. He's remains that way through the whole movie. So he's married to Katie Holmes, who we find out later was having an affair with somebody. So they're trying to figure out who she had the affair with and figure out the clues about who the murderer was. And then there are people that don't want to find out who the murderer was, so they're threatening Cate Blanchett's character. And then there's another person who's been sexually abused by his parents who goes to her for help. And then he might, and it's just, it gets kind of convoluted, but it is a very good gothic Southern horror film directed by Sam Raimi and some pretty decent performances. And if you're into that kind of thing, you get to see Katie Holmes' bare breasts in the movie. So if you're into that kind of thing. She was trying to upend her wholesome character that she did in Dawson's Creek, and it's worked successfully. But a decent horror film, and again, sort of something that is unexpected, a Southern Gothic sort of horror film that, again, if you're trying to put together the ultimate horror marathon and you want to try to get as many different tropes as well, The Gift is a good one to get in with that. Number 61 is got a little background on it. There was the original movie that came out in the 70s, and then there was a remake with Ryan Reynolds that came out in the early 2000s. Both of them are going to be considered this number 61. Based on a true story. And there was a book written about it that I read when I was a teenager. And it was during the time when I was a teenager and I was reading it. And it was the last time that I remember being so freaked out. I asked if I could sleep in my parents' bed with them. Actually, I think at the time it was just my dad because my parents were separated at the time, because I was scared after reading the book. I think he told me no. I don't remember, but it was one of the memory I have is that I read the book and it freaked me out so much that it was the last time I asked if I could sleep in my parents' bed. And I was like 14, 15 years old. It's the Amityville Horror, the horror house trope sort of thing, but based on a true story about a guy who bought this house and ended up killing his whole family, and then claimed that evil spirits were the ones that were forcing him to do this. The Simpsons did a great parody of it in the first ever Treehouse of Horror. But both the original version and the Ryan Reynolds version hold up. It's pretty much the same general storyline. They buy the house. The house starts slowly turning the man of the house into the psychopathic killer. And weird things happen, blood on the wall, voices, weird things like that. And they're both pretty decent versions of the film. I'm putting them both at number 61. As I said, I read the book based on the true story, scared the living crap out of me. And as I said, it was the last time I asked if I could sleep in my parents' bed. My dad. Number 60 is another film that I'm probably never going to watch again. But the early effects on it itself, because one of my favorite planets in the solar system is Neptune. And this is focused right outside of Neptune. So you got the big blue Neptune planet. It's Event Horizon. Lawrence Fishburne, I think Sam Neill's in it. And there's a bunch of other actors. Can't think of the top of my head. But it starts off as a sci-fi sort of film where they discover this missing spaceship. It's the future, obviously. Missing spaceship appeared outside of Neptune, so a salvage crew is sent to figure out what's going on. It's basically a ghost ship sort of trope, but in outer space. And when they get there, they discover that the Event Horizon ship was their mission was to somehow open a portal to a black hole or something like that. Instead, they believe that they opened a portal to hell and let in the devil and hellacious stuff, and they tortured and did all this stuff. And it's happening again to the people who are trying to salvage it. It's a freaky ass movie, some decent special effects. I'm not a big torture fan. This has a lot of kind of torture in it, psychological and physical. And the fact that it has Sam Neill and Lawrence Fishburne in it is crazy to me. But they were game, and it's Paul Anderson, who did the Resident Evil movies, and his wife is Mila Jovovich, directed this as well. And again, it's one of these films. I watched it. It freaked the living shit out of me. The special effects, particularly the ones outside of Neptune, the ghost ship sort of trope, but in outer space, is another good aspect. And then you throw in there the demon possession, torture, gateway to hell sort of thing. You get all the mixes you need for a decent horror film, and that's number 60. Number 59 finds The Ring, based on the Japanese film, The Ringu. You all know that this came out in the early 2000s. Naomi Watts. A videotape is delivered to your door. You sit in and watch it. It's just a picture of a well, and I think you see a creepy little ghost girl come out, and then it ends, and then you get a phone call literally as soon as the movie ends saying you have 7 days to live, and that freaks the living shit out of you. You got to try to figure out what's going on. Meanwhile, the little girl in the video is trying to get out and get at you. So kind of creepy. Was enough that they create a sequel to it. Again, an American adaptation of the Japanese film Ringu, which is a huge hit over in Japan. With a lot of cosplayers using stuff. I've seen, scary pranks, and one of the ones they always use is the well girl from The Ring. So it's a big deal for them over there. Number 58 is the theatrical adaptation, split into two parts, as it should be, of one of Stephen King's greatest novels of all time. It Part 1 and 2. Again, as I told you, I'm combining certain movies here and there. It Part 1 and 2 is basically one story split in half, because if you tried to film and release the whole thing, it'd be 5-6 hours long, because that's how long it is. But this version of it is just as good as my favorite version of it, which you're going to see later in the list. Is still my favorite, is that one, but this one does a decent job. It ramps up the gore and the horror aspect of it, where the TV version had to tone it down a little bit. This version is able to crank it up a little bit, and it's just as stunning a story as the original one and the novel, which I've also read, and a very good adaptation of it. Added things here and there to make it more intense. Some other stuff has been added also to make it closer to in tone to Stephen King's book. And because they have two movies that they can expand on some things, whereas the limited series only had a window of about 3 to 4. It had 4. It was a 2-2-hour. It was a 2-day event, 2-2-hour events. But when you cut out a commercial, it's only about maybe a 3.5-hour movie. They had to cut out a lot to get it into that window, but they needed to get the adaptation done. So they went back and they did this version of it, which is more of probably the better adaptation of it, because you get more of the story in there. But at the same time, there's the It TV show is still such a classic, and the fact that it is as lean as it is also helps as well. So you get the lean version, which is just as good as the extra poundage one, and the extra poundage one has a little bit more of the gore and violence that people were expecting that couldn't be done on the TV version. Number 57 is Pumpkinhead, a creature that gets called when a child is being abused, and the Pumpkinhead sort of becomes his defender. Lance Henriksen stars in it. Low budget. The creature is kind of creepy, but it's Pumpkinhead, and it's a defender of abused children, so you gotta kind of like it. Number 56 is Creepshow, a horror anthology. Anthologies were big in the early 80s. Twilight Zone, the movie, which has its own issues, but had 4 short stories that was filled out the movie, and they wanted to try something with horror, so they created Creepshow. They got Stephen King involved. They've got Toby Hooper and some of the other, I think like Wes Craven might even be involved with it also, but they got some of the best horror people to deal with it to create, like, I think they're mostly original stories. I don't know if they're adapting anything, but they are a horror anthology with a bunch of stories that are all horror related from the 1980s. Creepshow is definitely a Creepshow, spawned a sequel to it, which is good. Next up is Tim Burton's earlier stop motion film that he directed. In this case, number 55 is The Corpse Bride. He co-directed it, and Frankenweenie, he directed it. For all those who are confused, Nightmare Before Christmas was not directed by Tim Burton. It was directed by Henry Selick. Tim Burton was the producer, co-writer of the screenplay with Caroline Thompson, came up with the story, wrote the children's book it's based on. It's his baby, but he did not direct it. And if you want to find out the whole story behind that, go to Netflix, watch The Movies That Made Us, the Nightmare Before Christmas story, and you'll see the actual coming up. And Henry Selick is the director of Nightmare Before Christmas, and Nightmare Before Christmas will be appearing later in the list, obviously, as it should, in probably the second part. It's definitely not in the bottom half of the list. But The Corpse Bride is a decent film, and this is one that I told you the lists are fluid. This is probably one that's going to be moving up the list. There's a bunch, like right around this point. I'm pretty happy with the position of all this stuff. There might be a few moves that may move of some of these other ones here and there, but from this point on, all these films could sort of be moved back and forth, up further, whatever. And they're all worth it. I mean, all 80 of them are worth it to watch, but we're getting to sort of the mid-tier. We had the lower tier. Now we're getting to the mid-tier sort of versions. And number 55, The Corpse Bride, is sort of that mid-tier one. It's a not as bizarre a film as Frankenweenie, but it definitely has some definite vibes to it. I think it's a musical also, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I've seen it. I might need to revisit it for my own Halloween marathon. But The Corpse Bride is definitely number 55 on this list. Number 54 is another Stephen King adaptation, this time of a short story, and has a Mr. Frank Darabont, who hasn't really been seen in almost 10 years, but he'll be coming back doing Stranger Things, directing Stranger Things. But Frank Darabont directed The Mist, based on the fantastic short story. I want to say it's in Skeleton Crew, but don't quote me on that, based on the Stephen King one. And again, another great premise. A mist overtakes this main town, and the main character and his son are in the grocery store going grocery shopping when the mist hits, and they hear and see strange things in the mist. So they bunker down in the supermarket with a bunch of other people, and then realize that there is something in the mist trying to reach them, monsters and creatures, and they have to defend their supermarket and keep themselves alive. This film everyone knows how it ends. It is considered one of the most intense, kind of twisty sort of endings, but one of the absolute just best ones, but at the same time, a heartbreaking one that you can't believe what's going on. And a lot of the cast members of this movie went on to do Walking Dead because that was Darabont's next thing he did after this movie. You also get an appearance from the great Andre Braugher as well. Thomas Jane, who's just sort of this everyman sort of guy, is the main lead in this one. But you got at least 3 characters in this movie. The actress who played Carol, the actress who played, I forget the blondes in there, and then the older dude. They're all in this movie, and because they're all Darabont fans, and they went on to do The Walking Dead with him as well, the first season of it. The Mist is definitely probably the best adaptation of the Stephen King short story, which is a great short story, by the way. But it is a little bit different. That ending was all Frank Darabont. He came up with that one all by himself. The Mist ending itself sort of ends on a unknown note. Darabont decided to change it up and really gave you a punch to the gut with the ending for The Mist. Again, that's another one that is possibly could get moved up. Now, what's great about The Mist also was because when it originally came out, I don't think it was that successful, as most of Darabont's movies aren't that successful. But they eventually begot a cult following, and then that ending, really visceral ending, sort of got to a lot of people. But what was interesting about it was, I guess it did well enough that Darabont said he always kind of wanted to do it in black and white also. So he made a black and white version of it as well. I mean, just basically you strip the color off of the negative and you release it that way. And it's kind of a trend that you see. Godzilla -1 did a color and a black and white version. So Mist did a color and black and white version. You can only get that on the Blu-ray, and now the 4K is also going to have it also. But it has both. So Darabont shot it well enough that it could be just as visceral as a black and white film as it was a color film. Number 53, again, all these fluid lists. You may think these are too low for me on the list, but I've never been the biggest fan of these. I like the premise, but much like every other sort of slasher film in the 80s, it sort of ran its course. The Nightmare on Elm Street series. Wes Craven only handled the directing of like 2 of them, but it has some other really good ideas in there. The great idea itself is to have the main villain be a creature that is in your dreams and can kill you in your dreams. That's such a great idea for a film. And again, that also has, the original one has a Movies That Made Us episode as well, so you can learn about the whole making of the original Nightmare on Elm Street with Wes Craven. And then Wes Craven started getting into the metaverse before he directed Scream and before Kevin Williamson came along with New Nightmare, which was 1994, where he hadn't done a Nightmare on Elm Street movie in a while, and he had Freddy Krueger haunting the actors and actresses who played in the movie, including Robert Englund, who plays Freddy, was being tortured by himself as Freddy. It's just it's a crazy meta sort of movie. But this, and then the Dream Warriors is another really good one, which is one you wouldn't think much about, where you get a group of people. It's like, okay, we know what's going on. We need to train ourselves enough so we can actually take on Freddy in our dreams, because that's one of the things about these slasher films is that people don't learn. They don't learn. They react. They don't confront. And so Dream Warriors is actually pretty decent as well, but the rest, give or take them as well. But Nightmare on Elm Street, because it is so iconic, because it is hugely popular, and because there are so many of them and not all of them are good, that's why it's where it's at. But I mean, the original one's pretty good. I like Dream Warriors myself. The baby one's kind of weird, but it makes sense to how you bring Freddy back and, all the stuff. And then you actually have the decent Freddy versus Jason, which I would kind of add to this level, which is also pretty good when you have 2 of the like iconic characters fighting each other. That was kind of decent as well. And the New Nightmare is fantastic too. So it's not a great series, but it has its moments. and it's iconic, so you're probably going to have it on your horror list anyway. Number 52 is what many people consider the scariest movie of all time. I am not the biggest fan of it. That is why it's number 52, but I had to put it on the list somewhere. And I get it. It's 50 years old this year. It's The Exorcist, and or was it last year? It might have been last year. Last year, this year, it's 50 years old, and it's definitely it's based on a true story. Exorcisms and demon possessions are, if you believe that stuff, are actual things that people claim to have. And this was a movie version of what a demonic possession is like. And that's what makes it kind of creepy, with the pea soup and the deep voice coming out of a 16, 15-year-old girl, a male voice coming out of it. And she's saying stuff she shouldn't be saying and doing things she shouldn't be doing. And then in the deleted scene, she's like crawling around on all fours up and down the stairway, like a spider sort of thing. It's actually kind of creepy. But I had to put it on the list somewhere. Not the biggest fan of it. Same thing with this one, number 51. Everybody loves this one. This is a iconic Halloween staple. I'll probably get booed off the stage on this. I'm not a fan of it. Much like, I love Christmas Story, but there are tons of people who hate it. So who would put their Christmas Story on a similar spot if they were doing their top 50 Christmas movies, which I'll be doing one of those too also. It's Hocus Pocus. I'm not, as I said, the biggest fan of it, but you got Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker, and I forget the third one. It's in Sister Act. I got to give her props. Hocus. Oops. Kathleen and Jimmy. Okay. You also get Omri Katz and Thora Birch in it as well, which is good. And Doug Jones is in it too. Charlie Rocket's in it too. I don't like it as much as everybody else in the world does. It is considered to be a must-watch during the Halloween season, and it'll probably be on your playlist, or you probably is one of those movies that you play. And again, like I have movies when we get to the second part tomorrow, the movies that are closer to the top are ones that I play every Halloween and watch every Halloween when I can because I like them. And I know there are people that like that, but Hocus Pocus, it's not for me. Good cast, but just and the whole thing is, it came out of nowhere also. It was a decent film, and then it sort of disappeared. Nobody's talking about it. And then much like with Christmas Story, all of a sudden they're playing it over and over again on like ABC Family's 31 Days of Halloween, stuff like that. And all of a sudden people are like, oh man, this is a pretty good movie. And it was enough so that Disney did a sequel last year that was successful on Disney Plus. So again, maybe it's not aimed at me, but maybe I'm grading it too harshly, but I'm not a big fan of it. Number 50 is Coraline, stop motion from Henry Selick again, this time, based on an adaptation of the Neil Gaiman creepy book. And it is absolutely a creepy animated film, but it is a perfect Halloween spooky season film to watch. And it's part of the 31 Days of Halloween sort of event. And people are loving the Coraline stuff. And it's not much I can say about it. It's a decent film. And again, as I said, we're getting to that mid-tier where any of those movies can really move up or down, depending. Coraline is always a good one to check out and well worth it. Number 49, we find another Stephen King adaptation, because let's face facts, he's going to be on here a lot. 1408, which is a more underrated, based on a short story, underrated, not known too well about. This movie is a John Cusack tour de force. Samuel Jackson plays a very minor role in the movie, but he is in it for probably a grand total of about maybe 5 minutes of the movie, maybe 7 minutes, because that opening conversation between two seems to last a while. But this is John Cusack's movie. And again, the premise is a good idea if you're trying to get as many different horror tropes in a marathon as you can. This is sort of the locked room horror story. John Cusack is a writer who debunks haunted houses and ghost stories and stuff like that, writes books and articles about the most haunted places, goes in and debunks it because he doesn't believe. And so he'd heard all kinds of stuff about this hotel room 1408, that if you add all the numbers together, 1 + 4 is 5, +0 is 5, +8 is 13. And how haunted it is. And Samuel L. Jackson plays the concierge at the hotel. It says, I'm telling you, do not go into this room. It is, I know you're here to try to debunk it. This thing is real and it's going to fuck you up. He didn't say that, but you can definitely tell because it's Samuel L. Jackson. He is thinking it. And he did his job. I mean, John Cusack is a stubborn ass who says, just give me the keys. And Samuel Jackson's like, okay, I warned you. And I've seen people like you all the time, and they don't come back. And then John Cusack goes there. And as I said, it becomes a John Cusack film. As he goes into the hotel room, things start, seem to be normal to begin with. He's like, this is going to be a piece of cake. And then things just start slowly happening. And it's the buildup, slowly. And then just weird things happen, like stuff looking out the window and painting that moves and the lights that aren't are smoking and just different things that are happening that it builds and builds. It doesn't just go, wah! Like that. It builds up to the point where it goes, wah! But you are expecting it because they're building and building and building and building and building and building and building. And so 1408 is, as I said, if you like John Cusack, this is probably one of his better films. I personally, I know a guy I went to college with when I wrote how good I liked this movie. He's like, it's okay. He was also the guy who also helped create the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, but we're not going to talk about that. Yes, I know that guy. I went to school with him. He lived underneath me the year they came up with it. And then I worked with him when I was at Diamond. Okay, we're not going to talk about that anymore. I know people. Anyway, he said, it's okay. I like it. I think John Cusack does a fantastic job in the movie. And it builds and builds and builds, and it really fucks with your head. And it fucks with John Cusack's head as well. So, and that's decent. Number 48, again, I'm probably going to get hate for this, but I'm not an Edgar Wright fan. I don't know what it is about him. I'm not the biggest fan of him, but this film is pretty decent. And again, perfect for spooky season. It's a little bit of everything. It's a parody, but not really. It's an actual horror that has comedy in it, but is also kind of making fun of the tropes of the zombie culture. It's Shaun of the Dead. Play on the word Dawn of the Dead. It is a horror comedy, which is paying homage to and making fun of zombie movies, which is a very good way of doing this. Really lovable cast. It's British, so you're going to probably need to have the subtitles on if you can't understand their accents. And it's got its gore moments. It's got its gory moments. It's not, you might think it's funny, and it is. It has jokes. It's got some funny bits in it, but it also takes left turns, right turns, U-turns, and brings a lot of horror to things, a lot of pain when you have to kill a loved one, that sort of stuff. So it's a decent part of the zombie movie sagas. It's just, as I said, I just have a problem with Edgar Wright, and I don't know what it is. And I got to get over it because I want to see Sydney Sweeney and Barbarella directed by Edgar Wright. Or my male crush, Glenn Powell, in Edgar Wright's version of the Running Man. So we'll see what happens with that. Number 47 is a film that probably none of you have heard of, and it should probably be higher up on the list. But it's called Shadow the Vampire. It came out in early 2000s. I saw it in the movie theater. It's got Willem Dafoe in it. It's got, I want to say it's Jeremy Irons and Willem Dafoe. And the first ever vampire movie was Nosferatu, which is being remade this year by Robert Eggers, coming out at Christmas time. Go figure. It's to come out at Halloween, man. That's what I'm talking about. As I talked about half hour ago. You make the Halloween horror movies, you put them out in October, it's going to make bank. You don't put a horror film out on Christmas Day. You just don't. But Nosferatu is one of the earliest vampire movies, one of the earliest movies of all time. It's a black and white silent film, and the actor who plays Nosferatu, the makeup on it is phenomenal. Bald head, weird bat kind of ears, he looks like a vampire. And this is the 1920s. It's not even 1930s, the 1920s when this was made. And it's one of the creepiest, scariest, darkest films of all time, and it's in the infancy of filmmaking. So Nosferatu has been remade over periods of times here and there, and as I said, Robert Eggers is doing his version of it. And it's the first vampire movie. Because I think the deal with that was they could not get the rights to Bram Stoker's Dracula. I think Bram Stoker's family was refusing to give up the rights to it, because let's face facts, movies were early on, so it's like 1920s, and I think Bram Stoker wrote in the 1880s, 1890s. So you're looking at only about like a 30-year difference, which is nothing. It's 1994, so it's in the rearview mirror. It's not a big thing. So I think that's how they came up. They had to figure out a way to work around not being able to do Bram Stoker's Dracula, but still kind of do it, Anyway, regardless. So he is so creepy looking. And there have been all kinds of theories coming out that they actually got a real vampire to play the role because he is so creepy looking in the 1920s movies. And hence, number 47, Shadow the Vampire, that's what it's about. It's the making of the original Nosferatu in the 1920s. And the director, I think, is Willem Dafoe, actually does hire a vampire to play the role of Nosferatu, and has to give him rules about you can't attack humans and we'll feed you the blood, stuff like that. And you have to do what I say. And I think I really want to say, I think it's Jeremy Irons playing the role of Nosferatu. It's a great cast, by the way. It's a fantastic. It's not your typical movie you expect to see. Give me a second here. (1922) film. Okay. So 1922. Okay, so I'll do a Shadow of the Vampire. It's a 2000 film. Cast. Oh no, Willem Dafoe is the vampire. Okay, Willem Dafoe is the vampire. John Malkovich is the director who hires him. So Willem Dafoe is the vampire. John Malkovich is the director. Carrie Elways is in it. Uter Kier, Eddie Izzard, Catherine McCormack. Yeah, that's right. That's what it was. And it's funny because Willem Dafoe is also in the new version of Nosferatu, Eggers' version of it, because he's one of Eggers' go-to guys. So that's kind of funny. He's not playing Nosferatu, but it's funny that he's kind of coming full circle here. So it's Malkovich, and I knew it was one of those. It was Malkovich and Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe plays the vampire, and Malkovich is the director. It's a great movie. It's a really good. It's a movie making movie. And it's also a horror movie, and it's a really interesting idea having a real vampire play in the movie. Kind of interesting. Number 47. Number 46. I don't like this as much as everybody else did. It was when I first wrote these lists up, it was higher on my list. But I started thinking about it. I was like, nah, I'm going to push it back. It's another iconic sort of Halloween film, horror film. One of the best werewolf movies of all time. There's only so many werewolf movies, and this is considered one of the best, if not the best. Even though I think there's better werewolf movies. But in this case, number 46 is An American Werewolf in London, directed by John Landis. And again, it's another one of these horror comedies. And it's about a guy who gets bitten by a wolf on the heaths of England. He's an American tourist and ends up discovering that he is going to be turning into a werewolf. And he turns a werewolf and he starts, killing and maiming, kills his best friend. But his best friend's spirit hangs around with him and starts chit-chatting with him as he's trying to figure out a way to cure himself of the lycanthropy. So it is considered to be one of the best, if not the best, werewolf movie of all time. It's the one that sort of set up the tropes for it. I mean, yes, there was a Wolfman movie that came out in the part of the Universal sagas in the 1930s, and it was just spanning off of this. But this sort of started a trend with Wolfen and The Howling and stuff like that to do a bunch of these werewolf movies. And I think the transformation is one of the reasons why it's considered one of the best horror movies or werewolf movies of all time, is because no one had ever seen the amount of, and I think Stan Winston's the guy who handled that, the transformation of the character into the werewolf, that you actually see it on screen, that it's gone on and has become sort of the go-to for every sort of werewolf movie. So werewolf movies are making a comeback here. There's a couple werewolf movies coming out this year, and there's been a whole bunch since the 1980s when American Werewolf came out. Again, a sort of comedy horror aspect to it. But again, it's number 46 for me. A lot of people probably have it higher on their list, but for me, it's a number 46. Don't get me wrong, all these are decent movies, and it's an entertaining one to watch around Halloween spooky season, but it's just not for me right now. Being that much higher than 46. There's actually all the ones after it were ones that I could probably move up. American Werewolf, I could probably move back. We'll see. Number 45 is another film that not a lot of people know about, and it's got Bill Paxton and it's got Matthew McConaughey, and Bill Paxton directed it. It's Frailty, and I've talked about Frailty before. It's a little unknown film, didn't do very well, but it is a critically acclaimed film about a guy who claims that he is a demon killer, and he teaches his sons how to be demon killers also. But he starts it seems like he's killing just regular people. They're not acting in outrageous or crazy ways, that he's some sort of insane person, serial killer, just killing people and claiming that he believes that they are possessed by demons or are demons in human form. But he truly believes that, and his sons, they don't, and things happen. He gets sent to jail, stuff like that. So Matthew McConaughey grows up and he's kind of doubting his dad's lifestyle, about what he was doing, what he was taught, what he believes is real and what isn't. And then he sort of gets it. It's a really good film. Highly recommended. I'm probably going to move it up a little bit further here. This is a series that has had 2 sequels, a semi-third film that's connected but is completely different than the previous 2, has had 2 remakes recently, and a TV show, has created one of the most iconic characters in horror history with one of the most iconic actors in B movies, Mr. Bruce Campbell, This is the Evil Dead saga, and this is what Sam Raimi started his life and his career working on. He and Bruce Campbell are best friends. His brother Ted Raimi is also friends with Bruce Campbell. They were all horror movie junkies. So Sam Raimi, Campbell, and Ted Raimi got together, found a way to make some money, wrote the script for Evil Dead, got a bunch of their buddies together, paid them in booze, and they filmed this disgusting horror film that is basically the great-great-grandfather of the Cabin in the Woods saga. I honestly, before that one, I don't know if there was any Cabin in the Woods horror films out there, but this is the one that either defined it or created it. And Sam Raimi was able to use all of his crazy directing stuff that he learned. And this is his film school, learning to do this. The premise is a bunch of college kids and buddies go out to a cabin in the woods. They discover a basement. They read from a mysterious book, and all of a sudden all these demonic forces start attacking them, and they all start dying. The original movie has trees coming to life and sexually assaulting a woman. It's absolutely insane. And the final aspect is just a long stretch of when the demon is dead, of all his gooey blood, green, just bubbling up and splattering. Bruce Campbell is fantastic as Ashley Williams. And the original Evil Dead is almost straight up serious. But that's not who they are. So it was successful. So they made a sequel, Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn, and is basically a remake of the first movie, except instead of it being a group of people, it's Ashley and his girlfriend. His girlfriend gets killed or abducted or possessed or whatever, and Ash ends up having to try to save her, and a bunch of people who happen to stumble upon the cabin, join him. It is the beginning of like a comedy horror thing. Evil Dead 2 is like that. Sam Raimi has said the Three Stooges influenced him when he made Evil Dead 2, and you can see it. You can absolutely see it. It is absolutely some crazy, bizarre shit. And it's the one where Ash loses his hand and gets the chainsaw put on it, and he gets his boomstick. And then they made Army of Darkness, which was I think a PG-13 version of it that had nothing to do with the cabin in the woods. Instead, he gets transported back to medieval times, Ashley does, to stop the creation of the Evil Dead book that's there. And then they made a couple of remakes of it. One is a straight up remake of it, and one is sort of a follow-up kind of to it. All of the movies have done successfully, have been critically acclaimed, been fairly successful. Most of them have been. And Bruce Campbell is the king of the B movies. Sam Raimi went on to do much bigger things. And Evil Dead is still, as I said, I believe is the great-great-great-grandfather, the creator of the Cabin in the Woods horror trope, or is the one that defined it. It's hard to say, but it is. And then they did Ash versus the Evil Dead TV show. They've done comic books based on it. They've got action figures, bobbleheads. I got all that. Ash is a character on Fortnite. It's fantastic. So the Evil Dead series deserves to be at number 44. Not my favorite series because it is such a whacked out, crazy. And the first movie is so straight, and that last bit with the bubbling, it takes forever, it seems like. And the tree assaulting, it's all crazy shit. But here we are. Again, this one probably should be up forward, but number 43 is Tremors. Again, a monster movie that came out of nowhere, has Kevin Bacon in it as kind of the big star, Fred Ward as well. Michael Gross playing against type from what he was used to playing on Family Ties, where here he plays a gun-running conspiracy theorist guy, anti-government person who's married to Reba McEntire, which is outstanding, by the way. And it's a small town, and they are being terrorized by giant worms under the sand. And the heroes, Fred Ward and Kevin Bacon, are not the brightest bulbs on the planet. They got to try to figure out a way to survive against something that they've never seen before. Tremors is an outstanding film, Wonderful acting, great comedy horror aspects. Definitely belongs on this list, and probably should be up higher. But I love Tremors. I love the movie, and to me, it doesn't scream like spooky season, Halloween, like a lot of these other ones do. Tremors is just a great movie that you can really watch at any time. An entertaining, fun monster mash movie that's funny, but also has moments of holy shit, sort of stuff. It's really good, and that's why it's only number 42, or no, excuse me, 43, because it's the type of movie that, while it would fit into the theme of a spooky season sort of marathon, it's that movie that you just sort of want to watch on your own when you just want to watch something brainless and fun, and not necessarily have to have, it's not as dark. It doesn't take place in a cabin in the woods or a ghost ship or, an outer space mining ship or whatever. It takes place in the desert, full sun, in a small town of 10 people. It's phenomenal story, a great idea. And it's my number 43. Number 42, we have Teen Wolf. Michael J. Fox's, apparently he had made this movie before Back to the Future, and they were going to put it on the shelf because it wasn't a great movie. And then Back to the Future came out and became a huge hit. They had it on the shelf. They said, why don't we take advantage of it? Back to the Future came out in July. Teen Wolf came out like October, November. Became a huge hit because Michael J. Fox was in it. And this is more of a comedy that spun off a dramatic, serious TV show on MTV. And then that got a spin off of Sarah Michelle Gellar. It only lasted one season. But this original Teen Wolf movie, again, doesn't quite fit into the Halloween horror aspect thing. But again, I'm trying to get films you might be able to watch with your entire family that are horror aspects, but are not horrible. This is the werewolf trope, but played in a high school. And it's not overly violent. Michael J. Fox plays a basketball player, which is funny because Michael J. Fox is small. He's a basketball player that's a terrible basketball team. He has a crush on the most popular girl in the world who doesn't even know he exists. His best friend is a woman, a girl that he grew up with who's in love with him. His other best friend is like a con artist, sort of, always trying to find something to do. Styles is fantastic. He's got a little group of friends. He works at his father's hardware store. His mother is dead. And then he starts noticing weird things starting to happen to him, and he's not exactly sure what it is. And then he discovers that he turns into a werewolf and finds out that his dad is also a werewolf, but has been able to control it, does not have the uncontrollable urges that most werewolves do. He says, once you control it, you can just live a normal life. Just don't see people when you turn to the wolf, but you're not going to go out and be like these movie werewolves where you go out and just like look like a wolf and just start hacking and slashing. No, you're just going to you're a normal kid who just happens to turn to a werewolf. It's a different take on the werewolf genre, and it's fairly entertaining. Some fantastic comedic lines in it. And Michael J. Fox it's Michael J. Fox. He's the best. He's one of the best out there. And the final one for this first part, this first night of the 13 Days of Halloween, number 41, Robert Zemeckis, Michelle Pfeiffer, Harrison Ford, in a rare villainous mode, What Lies Beneath. What's interesting about What Lies Beneath is more of a, I think Zemeckis was trying for a a Alfred Hitchcockian sort of story, but he threw in a ghost aspect to it, which is what makes this a good spooky season. It's not a horror movie per se. It's more of a thriller, but there is a supernatural aspect with ghosts, killings, so like that. Michelle Pfeiffer is absolutely stunning. She's married to Harrison Ford. As I said, Harrison Ford plays a sort of a villainous character in this. And what's interesting about this is Zemeckis filmed this in between filming Castaway, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. Castaway is Tom Hanks, who plays a FedEx guy who on Christmas night ends up in a plane crash and lands on a deserted island and has to learn how to survive on his own. And in order to show the progress of time, the beginning of the film, Tom Hanks is like normal, looks like me, dad bod, sort of whatever. And he gets to the island. He's got to figure out a way to survive. And so he survives for like 4 or 5 years. And by the time we go back to him 4 or 5 years later, he's got to be skin and bones and toned and tanned and hairy, because that's what happens when you're a castaway. So Tom Hanks, they weren't going to CGI it. Tom Hanks had to lose that weight, and it was going to take time because that was a lot of weight. He had to lose like close to like 50, 60, maybe even 80, maybe even close to 100 pounds. I mean, 100 pounds, that's too much. But he had to, maybe not, because he was like 200 some pounds. They need him to be like in the low 100s. So he needed time to lose the weight. So they filmed the first part of Castaway when he was dad bod, Tom Hanks. And then Zemeckis is like, okay, you have 6 months to lose the weight, because it's also where they were filming it was probably the worst time to film during that 6-month period. Zemeckis knows what he's doing. He's a damn good director. So he probably said, okay, we're able to film this here. And so for the next 6 months, you have to lose the weight and we have to let nature progress. We can't film down there during the 6-month period. We'll come back to it once you've lost the 100 pounds, whatever. Have a good time. Adios. And Zemeckis didn't want to have such a bad layoff because his cast and crew, well, not his cast, but his crew was losing money because they couldn't work for 6 months either. You could conceivably say they could go and jump into another film and work on that, but they also probably had to start working on the pre-production for the second part of Castaway. And I know I'm going to a big circle, but there's a reason for it. So in that 6-month period, in order to make sure that his crew was still making money and working, he made What Lies Beneath, an easy peasy film, not a lot of characters in it. Michelle Pfeiffer basically carries this. She's luminous. She looks fantastic. Harrison Ford is a different version of Harrison Ford than we're used to seeing. He starts off as the Harrison Ford you're kind of used to, but then sort of takes a weird angle. And it's the general story of Michelle Pfeiffer plays an empty nester. Her daughter from her previous marriage is going off to college and is going to leave her alone in the house with her new husband, who she loves at the time, played by Harrison Ford, who is, kind of stepdad. Michelle Pfeiffer's daughter looks, treats him like a dad and stuff like that, and he treats her like a daughter. So it's a good, happy family. But Michelle Pfeiffer, that's like all she's had. She's had her baby girl, and now she's going off to college. So now she's an empty nester. And so she's got to find something to do because she's not used to this, because Harrison Ford works at the local college. So he's busy doing his stuff. So she ends up getting entwined with the neighbors next door, who seem to be a young couple who just moved in, who seem to have a vicious love-hate thing. They will make mad, crazy love and sex, just absolute, bone-chilling sex that would, make everybody in the world orgasm. And then they get into arguments, shouting, potential assaults, stuff like that. And Michelle Pfeiffer gets involved with it because she's got nothing better to do. And then the wife mysteriously disappears, and she thinks that the husband has killed her and buried her somewhere, because strange ghostly things start happening the minute that she disappears. So she thinks that her ghost is trying to communicate with her to tell her, avenge me, sort of thing. I'm not going to get any further into the story. I've already ruined some of it, but it is a really good Hitchcockian sort of horror-esque sort of film. There's not really a horror aspect to it, but it's a thriller that has a supernatural aspect to it, which makes it part of the Halloween crowd here. And that's why it's number 41. So I'm surprised I got myself done in an hour and a half. I thought it was going to be closer to 2 hours to do this. But yeah, that was numbers 40. That was number 80 through 41 of the top 80 Halloween films, in my opinion. Part 2 should be done tomorrow. I'm aiming for that. If not, I have a little leeway. It might not be until Sunday, but I do have the list. There it is. That's all you're going to see of it. I've got it already done, and I'm not going to do it now because I want to go to bed. I'm tired. I got stuff I need to do tomorrow. I'm going to try to go see We Live in Time. I got to set up for my show, my regular show tomorrow, and I'm going to do this show sometime in the afternoon, and I also got to do other stuff as well. So I've got a busy day tomorrow, so I'm going to adios now from here. An hour 30 is good. Hope you enjoyed it. This is day 1 of the 13 days of Halloween. You're going to see me for the next 13 days. Maybe get a surprise visit from my daughter, who I'm trying to convince to do a show for her, show for me during this 13 days windows. So again, these are movies that you can absolutely make a Halloween marathon out of and enjoy it for the spooky season it is. We'll do the final parts 40 to 1 tomorrow. Bye, guys.